The panel consists of Tim Ober, Dr. Tim Ober, one of the very most experienced team veterinarians that are still active on the field here, a long-time team veterinarian for the American show jumping team. Mike Gallagher, president of the Canadian Equestrian Federation, also a long-time member of the Equine Society and a very valued member of several General Assemblies. Christian Payot, vice president of the French Equestrian Federation, ex-rider, horse owner, very active in this field also. Peter Cullings, ex-rider, veterinarian, clinical veterinarian, testing veterinarian, and research responsible, and several years also in this field. So I'm looking forward for a very interesting discussion session, and I'd like Tim Ober to start. Please, Tim.
Thank you. I'd like to just take a quick opportunity to clarify something. I took the opportunity just before lunch to make a point to distinguish lameness from soreness, and I want to make it clear that Dr. Foreman does indeed know how to work up and diagnose a lameness. In fact, he's one of the people who teaches people like me how to do it. So I want to be clear that no disrespect was meant with my taking advantage of that opportunity to make that point. I also want to express my gratitude to Chris Hodgson for his open mind, which he demonstrated here as well at the end. I think that that's important, and I'll touch on that point later. I've learned quite a bit at this meeting. I tried to approach it myself with an open mind, although certainly having an experience which I think you're all familiar with in the American system. And I've learned that one thing that struck me particularly was Dr. Hinchcliffe and Dr. Tutane pointed out that good research is carefully designed and targeted to answer very specific questions. And I think when we review the information we have collected here, sadly, there's not quite enough of that. I also heard Mr. Owers and others insist that a horse requiring nonsteroidals in order to trot up at a competition or in order to compete should not be competing. I agree with that statement. But I think that there comes a point where we have a very different perspective about the horses that we're talking about treating. I am not talking about treating horses that require nonsteroidals. Those are the limping horses that we're discussing. I think that to put it into a simple example that perhaps could be useful in the circumstance of trying to help through the press, spectators understand what we're talking about. If you were to go for a run, whether you've just begun the experience of running on a daily basis or you've put in a particularly big workout, you might go home and take a shower, get dressed, and walk to your car and feel the effects of that run. You'll be sore. When you maybe open your car door and go to sit in your car, you're going to feel that run. If you're limping and you're lame and you've injured yourself, you're going to go to the doctor. So there's a difference between those two scenarios. We're not talking about treating the horse that needs to go to the doctor. We're talking about treating the horse who's feeling some soreness from competition. These are horses that are sound enough and fit to compete by all standards. They'll pass a jog, or they already have passed a jog maybe. But I think it's important to recognize that those horses exist and ask the question, what do we do with them? I just want to briefly talk about what it's like to work as a team vet, what my responsibilities are, where my frustrations are. This year, first of all, in the course of competition, preparing for, during, and after competition, we team veterinarians have very few tools available to us to help these horses who are sore or injured until we get to the point where they're no longer competing for some period of time. This year, we had 8 Nations Cup competitions over a span of 12 weeks. 3 of those Nations Cups were back-to-back. That meant I had teams of horses that had to be prepared on Tuesday or Wednesday, the day of the jog, to go again. And they've just finished Sunday, and during that week before, they've jumped their initial warm-up class, or the class they might use as a warm-up class. They've jumped the Nations Cup 2 rounds on Friday, and then they've jumped the Grand Prix on Sunday. Then they've gotten on a truck, and in the case of Rome to St. Gallen, shipped for 2 days to arrive in St. Gallen, and then jog again on, I believe it was Wednesday, in the afternoon. That's quite a schedule, and to practically expect a horse to go through that without support, without help, I think is rather unreasonable, and I question, in all seriousness, whether that's in the best interest of the horse. So how do we handle these situations? For me, the use of a non-steroidal during the window of time that it is anti-inflammatory, has an anti-inflammatory effect, but not an analgesic effect, is the best way we know at this moment in time to help one of those horses recover from that soreness that you as the runner are feeling when you get into your car, or that Usain Bolt probably feels on Monday morning after he's competed a week of track and field. He's probably not sitting on the couch. He's probably trying to help himself feel better. Maybe he chooses to sit on the couch without any sort of non-steroidal help, but that's doubtful. And that's his choice. I, as the treating veterinarian, and the rider need to make that choice, or help make that choice for the horse, and we take that obligation, responsibility very seriously. I also think that we should not be treating horses before competitions, certainly not within the analgesic realm of a non-steroidal. But right now, I don't have the opportunity to help that horse who's finished showing on Sunday prepare for the following week, when he has to show the following week, if he can pass the trot up and if the rider feels comfortable about his soundness level. We want to put him in the ring as happy and fit and comfortable as possible. Regulations that are too restrictive don't allow that, and the horses are going into the ring less than ideally happy. They'll pass the minimum standard of the jog. These are the horses that I'm talking about. And this is the impetus for this whole discussion, from my perspective as a team vet, about non-steroidals. We don't want to put lame horses in the ring. We don't want to give horses medications so that they can. We want to help them have a better experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I had planned to keep the initial part on the scientific side also, so I'll ask Peter to do your leading introduction.
As dear participants, Mr. Chairman, I was asked to give some more scientific, ethic, veterinary aspects on this issue, and since I have one or two graphs, we were allowed to show some slides. And to summarize a little bit my earlier talk yesterday and some of the other talks we heard during those 2 days, I think still, here we go again. You push one button and something other happens. You can still claim that you have an enhancing performance effect of the actual capacity of the horse if you have a problem with pain or masking lameness. We have shown that the effect lasts longer than plasma concentrations indicate, at least for 24-48 hours. We heard about the screening levels, and I think the relevant plasma levels that we should take in consideration for the future is actually the current screening levels. If you're calling FEI or screening level of detection, reporting, or relevant level of detection, or like the HLC in racing do with the international screening limits, it doesn't matter. And taking into consideration that the irrelevant plasma concentration is calculated, and both experimental and pharmacology behind that will be below 100 nanogram per ml, and that's 0.1 microgram per ml. So that will conclude that non-steroids could threaten horse welfare by masking pain, lameness. And we're not talking about fatal injuries. I don't think we want to see dead horses. That's not the problem. It's the wear and tear on every day, increased injury risk, stress fractures, delayed muscle soreness or muscle strains with damaged muscle fibers and connective tissue damage that will not be supported with non-steroidals. They have to rest at least for a day or two, otherwise they will not heal. That's basic physiology, biology. And we also have the question about non-steroidals that should not mask, of course, we think, pain and lameness at horse inspections or veterinary checks. Either there is an early morning inspection or re-inspection, or the veterinary gaze during endurance ride. I mean, it's meaningless to have that if you allow non-steroidals at those levels that are suggested in the progressive list, especially. And I could give an example. During the Body Question Games in Stockholm 1990, I was responsible for the medication program. It was quite recently introduced at that time. And during the 3-day event, the final inspection after the cross-country phase, the morning after, before the show jumping, we announced that we will take some tests. And some of the countries, I will not mention what countries, but they, oh no, you can't do it now. You have to do it after the show jumping. Yeah, but we want to test the horses now. It's a veterinary horse inspection, if the horse is lame or not, or on drugs or not. So that was a little bit shocking, I think, for some of the teams, that you have to take into consideration effects also on horse inspection, not just the competition. And if you use non-steroidals to treat bad management, that's the wrong way. You should change the management problems. If it's too long, too frequent traveling, too frequent competition, too hard or difficult courses, or too rough surface, change that. There's a lot of studies going on the surface. There's been studies on traveling. We have asked for many years, trying to get the FEI to somehow monitor the competing frequency. And we heard one argument just recently that you have to treat the horse after the weekend because it has to go for the next show on Tuesday or Wednesday. That's not good management. That you have to take care of the horse in a better way. Quite simple, actually. And we heard the recent trend in racing, Lynn Hillary described well. But also there is a trend in the human sports medicine. If you study recent literature, and we heard from the WADA representative here that there's a starting discussion of the pros and cons, use and misuse of non-steroidals in human sport athletes. As I mentioned the example yesterday with the soccer candy or football candy, diclofenac, 1 tablet every day. Like the old days, the 1 bute every day. And as Jorge Breisner told us, if one rider or horse owner use it for one horse, then the rest want to use it as well, just in case. That's how it works. You've seen it with a lot of other drugs as well. And what we heard yesterday about the WADA code, actually one of the criteria for prohibited substances is the use of the substance represents an actual or potential health risk to the athlete. And I think that could be used also for the equine sports. And to clarify some of the questions that was raised also during the last session, you have to consider that, okay, here you have plasma concentration microgram per mil, and here's the time. You have a elimination curve. It should be, of course, like this with a very long elimination at the very end, but this is more like for making it more easy to. Hey, I didn't do anything. Here's the elimination. You take, as an MCP, I take a swab test, a blood sample here. What does this tell me? Or you, after the lab has answered. At that moment, in this horse, you have this concentration. At a certain time, at a certain level. You can't say anything if it's the end of an elimination, if it's a just made treatment, contamination, sabotage, or whatever. And if you're discussing half doses, 12 hours before, but at the end of the day, I take the blood sample, send it to the lab, and the lab with the progressive list suggesting with 8 microgram per mil, they will just answer about 8 microgram. So even if you say, oh yes, of course, we gave half dose 12 hours before, you're not sure. It could be another treatment. Since it's below 8, as the suggestion for the progressive list, there will be no sanction, no positive case. Bear that in mind. And then we have the irrelevant plasma concentration. We had a question. I think you should fight for zero tolerance against doping and medication during competition. But zero level is something completely different. You may have zero level somewhere down in the lake if you want to count molecules. 77 half-lives or whatever. So this is the irrelevant plasma concentration that we heard about earlier, 10 nanogram or 0.01 microgram per mil. And then we had a calculation and experimental data for effective plasma concentration about 1 microgram. And then we use screening levels somewhere in between. And I think there is the level we should aim. And that's not a threshold. Someone said, how will national authorities react if you say it's not zero? Well, it's a technical laboratory question. There's never zero. Yeah, maybe next week down in the lake. But it's the detection level at the lab. So screening level is the answer on what level FEI should go for, in my opinion. If we consider bute 8 microgram and flunixin 0.5 microgram per mil plasma, and was striking, you have the Clean Sport Commission making their final presentation, and Lord Stevens Commission as well. Everyone was happy. And then on some reason, someone, I have no answer, suggested this progressive list and shoot down the Clean Sport Commission's presentation. Why? There must be something very important to do that. Everyday living, money, keep the sport, the business going on. I mean, this is not low levels. So I can't really understand how someone had this strategy. Someone underestimated the reaction, obviously. Okay, to move further. Of course, we all say it's in the best interest of the horse. Is it so with this progressive list suggestion? Or is it for the rider, horse owner, sponsor, clean sport? Or is it for the treating of team vets to make their living because they are pro-bute? Or even the pharmaceutical industry could have an interest to see the decreased 50% selling the market go down, if you want to be a little bit provoking. But there must be some reason. You just heard about the swine flu, pharmaceutical industry's input there. So beware. To summarize this, for and against. And Tim Ober has been kind to send a PM to some people beforehand talking about the equine welfare, and you will have equine welfare with non-steroidals. And we think we will have it without non-steroidals. It has been claimed that you have an anti-inflammatory effect. Yes, we both agree. And that could be differentiated from the pain-killing effect, according to some of the papers we heard earlier. But you also heard, according to Pierre-Louis Toutain, one of the most world-famous pharmacologists, you can't differentiate. Still, if you have COX-1, COX-2 inhibition, still a large portion of that pain-killing effect will be through the anti-inflammatory effect. So you can't say it's just either that or that. And if the effect or efficacy definition of wording, about 12 hours with a half level, no. But we still think you have an anti-inflammatory effect, and with the levels up to 8 microgram for sure, you will have effect for longer time. An increased injury risk, we think it is. Someone said it's just good for the horse. Make your own decision. Plasma levels below 8 microgram for progressive lift, we think it should be below, at least below 0.1 microgram, that way we have an irrelevant plasma concentration. Could you compare to WADA rules that's also made in the arguments before this meeting? Well, I don't think it's relevant. We heard about that. I don't have to tell you again about the horse can make decisions or not. And they also concluded that lacking of scientific data. I haven't heard anything during those 2 days that it's support of the horse to treat it with non-steroidals that will be benefit for the muscles, benefit for the joints, benefit for the horse to be treated before or day after or during night, or even have a better sleep. But there are clear indications for several studies and reviews that you will have negative effects. And is there a conflict of interest? The proposal that was made for the AEP meeting in December from the International Treating Veterinary Association, yes, I think it is. There's an interest, of course, to treat horses. So, a little bit provoking, but I think that was my role. This is my message. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Peter. We'll now go on to listening to the representatives for the regulating bodies in the respective countries. Mike Gallagher from Canada, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. For those of you that don't know, Canada, one of the reasons I was asked to speak here was that Canada's national medication policy does allow the use of one non-steroidal. That model is, our model is very similar to what is being proposed at the FEI. So, as Kent Allen mentioned yesterday, there are existing models out there that could be studied to see what the effects have been. We don't have any significant concerns. We don't have problems with the public or with sponsors. However, I think some of this discussion in Europe, the word phenylbutazone is a well-known word. If you ask the average Canadian what that word was, they probably wouldn't even know. Outside of the equestrian world, they wouldn't know what it means. The only difference in our program is that we allow the use of the non-steroidal 24 hours prior to competition, no closer than 24 hours. And some of the studies we saw here yesterday all indicated that lameness masking effect would disappear within 24 hours. the half doses that John Foreman studied would disappear in 12 hours. Also, we mentioned yesterday that in Canada, we find, depending which year we looked at, 8% to 12% of the horses tested were using one of the non-steroidals. And to respond to the comment that if non-steroidals were allowed to be used, that everybody would use them, I think the evidence in Canada and the United States shows that that's not true at all. If your horse does not need them, they wouldn't use them, and that evidence supports that. The comment made yesterday that, well, that's different because it's a national show. If it was an FEI show and there are medals involved, then it would be different. And I can assure you that our competitors at our large national shows take winning those classes very seriously, and they have just as much drive as a competitor at an FEI show. I should mention too, in Canada, as you heard in the United States, we have complete support of our veterinary associations. Our treating veterinarians support this policy virtually 100%. At this conference, I was kind of discouraged in that there seemed to be preconceived ideas before people got here, and the presentations that were made, other than John Foreman's, none of the presentations made showed any evidence as to what the effects would be of a half dose of a non-steroidal 12 hours out. All the evidence was, there was things like, this is what happened in Kentucky in 1995 when the rules were all different, and there were examples, even this morning, in the racing industry, of full doses of phenylbutazone and what would happen. And that's not what we are discussing or what we're proposing. We absolutely do not support the use of non-steroidals to mask a lameness or to show a horse that shouldn't be in the ring. All we want to do is ensure that our horses have the best therapeutic treatment that veterinary medicine can provide them, and inflammation needs to be treated. It's certainly well documented that inflammation needs to be treated right away, and if there is inflammation, it should be treated. I don't think it's much different when we talk about the human athlete. It's not much different than competing all day and then at the end of the day taking a couple of aspirin. And maybe this discussion should be around aspirin for horses instead of phenylbutazone, because I think the sensitivity of phenylbutazone is a hot topic. Maybe we should just be talking about, is it okay to give our horses aspirin after competition? Right now it's not. So I would like to, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. I would ask everybody to keep an open mind. There was a comment made that, at the end of this session, we should have a direction and we should tell people where we're going with this. I totally disagree with that. We are in Europe. I think every European country is represented, and then there's about 3 of the rest of us. I think the other countries in the world deserve the opportunity to see all of these presentations that are going to be posted, and that we keep this debate going and not make up our minds until all the evidence is in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'll leave then the word to Christian Payot. And as you saw from Lisa Lazarus' review of the legal situation, France is one of the countries that has the strictest legal situation. And I suppose Christian would comment as well on that. Christian, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm sorry for that, but I have no responsibility at all in the French government. Not at all. So it's not so easy to make a speech after 2 days and 2 hours after lunch. So please, people who are ready to sleep, wait 30 seconds more, and then I will finish quickly my speech. I would like, first of all, to say thank you to all the speakers who gave a presentation Monday and Tuesday. I think that all of us, we feel more clever about the subject of progressive list now. And I was quite surprised that technicians or specialists do not agree. I thought maybe I was naive that all technicians, they always agree at the end. But looking to what they said, they disagree on their interpretation. So it means when they give interpretation, they don't do their job. They take our job. Now, after the presentation of the technicians, it's a decision to be made by the politics, not by the technicians. So now we are all elected peoples in the national federations or at the FEI in front of our responsibility after knowing all what has been said in favor or against this progressive list. I mean, everybody is for the welfare of the horse, I understood. Everybody is honest. There is no bad or good ideas. There is just different ideas, but we have elected people to decide by ourselves, and technicians, we will use them to make sure that the rule is respected when we will decide. So, I'm on your book against this progressive list. I'm against for three reasons. First of all, as a vice president of the French Federation, it is an obligation to be against, whether I like it or not, because this is a criminal law to promote doping product for athletes or for horses. So progressive list is including products which are not allowed. So if I support this list, it's like if I was supporting cannabis for riders. This is the same risk I'm personally taking, so I don't want, so I'm against. For FEI, I'm against this list because we can see that part of the world, let's say about 60% of international competition, will not respect the rule of FEI if we put as a rule the progressive list. This means FEI will be very weak. And we are elected to make a strong FEI because we will support our sport only if FEI is strong and the authority of FEI cannot be discussed. And the third reason I'm against is as a vice president of EEF, look, if we take the progressive list, 9 countries of Europe cannot use the progressive list. This means we will fix our rule, and the rule of EEF will be more important than the rule of FEI. This is stupid. EEF has not been created against FEI. We maintain that we have to help FEI to be strong, and we have to help FEI to take the right decisions. And if 9 countries cannot apply the rule, this means we will have to give explanation to the public and to see how FEI can manage by organizing FEI circuit, not respecting FEI rules. I take one example. We have the ranking list Rolex. If we take the progressive list is allowed, we will have a ranking list of the riders. Some of them will use Butte, some of them cannot use. Are we ready to print ranking top 1, top 2, or 3 with Butte or without Butte? This is impossible. And the FEI rule or statute is to guarantee fair competition. It doesn't guarantee. So even if I like, I am in favor of the progressive list, politically we cannot. So that's all. It doesn't work. So it was good that we could talk on meat, but at the end, if it's a General Assembly, we vote for the progressive list, we will never use it. So it's useless. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. I've noticed the team has been active, taking notes here and there, and since he was the leading speaker of the panel, I think he deserves the right of a short remark after the other speakers. Tim, please.
Thank you. Dr. Cowling, I just have a couple of points or questions. First, I would say that we agree on one point, and that is that we should not use nonsteroidals to overcome bad management. And the key to that is education of the people that you are concerned will be employing bad management. That's a part of any process, any change. Let's be clear about the progressive list rules. My understanding, when I stood behind the proposal for Butte, was that the administration would be 1 gram once within a 24-hour period, not within 12 hours of competition. What in effect that means is post-competition for show jumpers. Whether 8 micrograms is the cutoff or not, I'm not sure. But I think that we have had enough science presented here that indicates there's no pain-killing effect in that window, that I think we need to consider that notion, and I think you've rejected it outright. And the third point I just want to make is you mentioned that there was no evidence presented about beneficial effects of nonsteroidals. I think Dr. McElraith would say differently. I think he made it very clear that there was disadvantages to not treating inflammation.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'll leave the word to the floor, and I will be able to and ready to take questions or opinions or whatever you want to state. Yes. As usual, please state who you are and.
Certainly, Rowley Owens from World Horse Welfare. Just a couple of comments, really. One comment and one sort of a request. The comment is, I've heard several times over the last couple of days, and indeed since last November, about the need for helping horses because of the routine that they're on. At the end of a 4-star cross country, horses need help because of their show jumping rota or their demands on the horse. They need help to fulfil that. It just seems far more sensible to me, rather than going down a line of giving them something to help that, to look at actually what we're asking horses to do. If horses really do need bute at the end of a 4-star cross country, then there's something wrong with the 4-star cross country. And if horses need bute to fulfill their show jumping obligations, then we need to reduce the amount of demands we're placing on our horses. That's one comment. The second one is, if, and it's obviously a huge if, but if the decision was to take the progressive list or a variation thereof, in many ways, from a welfare perspective, I would say, I totally understand that the vast majority, if not all FEI horses, are looked after like royalty. And what really concerns me is not the FEI horses, it's the implication that message will send out to the tens and thousands of horses that are competed in non-FEI competition. And it will legitimise treatment with non-steroidals for those who are doing it. And I'm convinced that it will encourage others to do so. So there is a huge message, communication challenge to be got out, not only to the general public, but from my perspective, for the welfare of the horse, to make sure that those outside FEI competition understand the justification for whatever decision the FEI makes, because it is the global leader of horse sport, and people will take their lead from it.
Short remark from Tim Ober.
In regard to the second point, which was the importance of a communication and education program, I think that's a very valid point. I think it's integral to the success of the sport. In regard to your first point, which again focuses on the concept of need for these medications or need for this help in light of the demands of the sport. When you walk to your car sore after that run, you don't need to take aspirin. The question is it in your best interest to take that aspirin? These are optional circumstances. I think we feel better about what we've done to help the horse if we feel better, as we feel better to do that we've done what it takes to help us with the soreness we're experiencing on that walk to the car. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about taking horses who would be unable to pass the trot up or unable to compete and turning them into horses that would be able to.
Fleming, Winberg, Sweden. We've just listened to Peter Callings talking about management, and having worked with the Swedish eventing team for 5 years, I feel I have a bit of experience about those horses that need a little help. And I think we get into dilemma, because I think the FEI would be better off looking at management rules. Ban those horses from competing every week, say every second week. Let them have that time. It still brings the dilemma that if we do post-competition treatments or treatments on Sunday night, we will look into that escalating low level of non-steroidals 2 weeks later, or 4 weeks later, or 6 weeks later maybe. But what I feel is that you're saying is that what we want to do is we want to help that marginally sound horse, because inflammation is an escalating process. And after that strenuous effort that we have, the inflammation, if we treat at night, we will put a lid on the inflammation, meaning that the horse will not be sore next day. I do that. I go out and work hard around my farm. I take 2 aspirins when I come in at night because I know I won't be sore next day, so I can go out and work easier. It makes sense. But I'm not sure that it's the benefit of the horse, because we will basically just run horses that are marginally sound, that can't really take it. And they'll be lame on Sunday night if they don't get non-steroidals then. So, you know, in my mind, I think we have a problem there. I think we need to look at it in a different way and see to that we're not treating those horses just to compete. I can compare it. I have a son who drives race cars. Well, if he doesn't change that bad oil, his car breaks down and he's laughed at because he was stupid. If my daughter who rides horses rides her horse and it breaks down because she wasn't looking after it because it was sound, we have a horse welfare issue. That's what it's all about.
Any more? Okay. Yes.
School, I have an answer, but it's
Please, Eleonora.
difficult. So I have to come back to the riders really clear. I cannot play and to say, I think that, they think that, they think another things. After Copenhagen, I come back to the rider and said, hey guys, stop everything, because all the European countries, as the president said in Copenhagen, have a law and are against this non-steroidal. So they asked me, how many countries? I said, about 30 and 44. After this country became 11, then I have the contact direct with the minister and with the first state judge of 2 countries. So we drop off Italy and Switzerland. Now we have 9 countries. But these 9, as Lisa Lazzaro says tomorrow, on these 9, 7 don't have identified the substances in the prohibitions. And the second point is, in the most of the law, country national law, is a state that the federation, the national federation, has to respect the international federational law. So please, could you tell me what I have to say to the riders? Is 44, 30, 20, 11, 9, 7, or 2 countries that have problem with the law? Thank you. For the bad management, I think Rodrigo have to say something.
To Mr. Callings, if these 2 countries, France and Sweden, that are the ones that have really the problems with the law, then and we take and we adopt the progressive list, then we don't go to Sweden and France. That's it. And then how are you going to explain that to the Swedish people, where this equestrian sport is the second sport in your country after ice hockey before football? What are you going to tell them? No, there's no more equestrian here. Because we are trying to help the horses and recover well from competition. Then we don't go to France and Sweden, and we go to the rest of the world. Go to new places where we can do our work and take care of our horses. And that's for the bad management.
And the last point, sorry, concerning bad management, we said the riders, they are doing bad management, but in my opinion, as organizer and as director of the Riders Club, my experience is they are forced to jump too much, not because they decide, but sometimes, the most of the time, because of the calendar. Looks, for example, the program of a CSIO. They have to jump 2 course for the Nation Cup and sometime a jump off. It's 3 course, 1.60 meters. Then they have to do in some show the qualification, 1 or 2 qualification for the Grand Prix. Then the horses have to jump the Grand Prix, 2 courses and sometime jump off. This in CSIO. Sometime in 1 week, CSIO, they have to jump 6 courses. And then the calendar put La Baule, Rome, Rotterdam. We have sometime a couple of shows, one after the other. This is also a problem. This show, they don't give a lot of money apart a couple to the riders. So they have horses that cost 1 or 2 or 3 million euro, and the owner is asking for half back prize money. So they are obliged also to jump in other show. The Olympic, we saw the photo with the infusion. But you know how many letters the Riders Club, and also the FEI sent to the Olympic Committee in order not to go to Hong Kong. So the problem is not question of riders that want to dope the horse, that want to cover their lenses. First point maybe is we have to check on the calendar. Thank you. Sorry to disturb so much.
It's all right, Eleonora. Maybe Lisa would like to comment a little on the legal situation before we go to next questions.
I'll be very quick. Just to clarify and to respond to Eleonora's question, what I was attempting to communicate earlier today is that our current legal assessment is that we have to assume that in all of the 9 countries that I named, it would be prohibited to use NSAIDs in competition. The distinction that I tried to make in being fully transparent and giving you all the information is that it's incredibly clear in France and Sweden there's no room for argument. In the other 7, based on the differences in the way the laws are written, it's not as clear and they're in sort of descending severity. But until those 7 governments tell us that it wouldn't be prohibited, particularly Butte, I think we have to assume or operate from a risk analysis standpoint as if it would be. And that's really, so I would continue to maintain that it is currently 9 jurisdictions that we have to be aware of and concerned about and operate accordingly.
Christian Payot, please.
Yeah, just Rodrigo, I wanted to tell you, you are right. This is a possibility, but this is a fact. Of course, if a French riders doesn't want to come because of the French law, we cannot do anything. But you also have to check with Frank. If the list is accepted, I think he has problems to organize his competition. So maybe you have also to stop to go to the good shows in Germany. So it's not so simple. I'm not aggressive with the riders against that. I'm just saying the FEI has a full responsibility, and it's not so simple. So it seems to me that you are a little bit direct and quick to your proposal. But I will accept if you decide,
Yeah. Dr. De Becker, Belgium. Answering on Mr. Kellings was asking why are people asking for aspirin or other drugs. I would say, look, first of all, I'm really convinced that most treating vets and most team vets are very serious people and that we are very serious concerned about the welfare of the horse. But it's not because we have a zero tolerance that it means that there is zero use of medication. From the moment that the zero tolerance rule was accepted and Butte was not allowed anymore, we saw an unbelievable increase from alternatives. People who said we are against Butte, but on the other hand, they gave several herbal extracts and so on and so on. Everybody here knows, because we are not so naive, that there are still several drugs who are not detectable. To mention one name, it was very unhealthy for horses, ACTH. It's used already many years. Even today, a lot of horses get an unhealthy drug like ACTH. So we, as treating vets and team vets, the main reason why we asked to use aspirin is because we think that we can stop this abuse of medication on the shows with a simple gift of aspirin. And that's the reason why we ask for that rule, and not to cheat, and not to because, and that's also something that I want to mention, there is a big difference between drugs who are used as doping and used as treatments. And what we ask, and that's the main reason why we ask for threshold levels, is that a lot of horses who are treated are still in danger, and the riders are not protected, even sometimes 10 days, 15, 20 days after the treatment, that some of those used medication shows up. The rider had never the attention, the vet had never the attention to cheat, but you showed up. So also the riders have to be protected. And that's the reason why we fight for this for us, stupid zero tolerance rules. Thanks.
Thank you. There were some questions up there.
Yeah, I'm Hans Wies. I'm the Chief Veterinary Officer of Switzerland. I try to defend here a position of the official governmental position or as a representative of the Federal Veterinary Office. And I think the look in the future, what Rodrigo Pessoa did, is a little bit dangerous, because what can happen and what would probably happen is that many countries on the list, we saw this morning from Mrs. Lazarus, they will change the regulation. So the countries will change their regulation, because I think these countries, they will not make a step back in a discussion we had about 25 years ago in the opposite direction. And I think actually we have the chance to solve this problem in an internal way. I mean, we are here, all of us, me too included, interested in horses, competing or organizing or in an official function. But when we, and Mr. Payo said that, led the decision to the politics, and I think he meant the politics or the politicians of the federation, but I think it could go a step further. The decision to the politicians, to the official politicians, and I tell you, in many countries, it will not be able to step back in this question, because in Europe there is a sensitivity for animal welfare and especially for horses, and actually the public didn't realize this discussion in a broad way, but when they will realize it, I'm sure there are only losers. All of us here in different functions, we would all be losers, and the biggest losers would be the riders.
Okay, here. May I have a question, please? Up here.
Yep.
Albrecht Fenner from Germany. I have one comment concerning the WADA argumentation. I think this argument has been weakened very much since we heard that the WADA intends to restrict the use of NSAIDs due to increased risk for the athletes. That's one point. And then I have a question to Tim Ober and ask for also the assessment of other experts. You told us that it has been proved that half dose of an NSAID doesn't mask pain in Mr. Foreman's study. But I ask, does this model with the screw putting permanent pressure on the hoof really reflect the real situation in a horse with mild pain and mild lameness? I really doubt this.
We have several responses that are lining up here. Peter Cullings first comment on the aspirin side, and then Tim Ober on this, and then I have Cecilia Lunell up in the corner there also.
Thank you. Dr. Ober, I'm a little bit surprised when you say you're not aware of a phenylbutazone level of 8 microgram according to the progressive list. I thought you were at least somewhere behind that. But now we're talking aspirin suddenly. Good in a way, but in another way. We haven't been talking about aspirin or actually salicylates or acetylic acid. But there was quite extensive work of the FEI some years ago to lower the levels, because experience in testing had indicated that abuse of salicylates was possible, obtaining a clinical effect in the horse by administration of low doses without exceeding the threshold, the old threshold. So it was actually lowered to 625 microgram per ml in urine and 5.4 microgram per ml in plasma. And now again, the progressive system to raise that to the old threshold, the international threshold of 750 microgram per ml in urine and 6.5 microgram per ml in plasma. So we haven't been discussing this very much. But a final argument to Dr. De Backer is, I think that's an absurd argument. You can't have a systematic okay for treatment with non-steroids because some people use alternative treatments. That's a pseudo argument.
Tim?
I'd like to respond. Sorry, I'd like to respond first to the comment up here. I'm not sure that I heard that WADA intends to modify their non-steroidal policy. I heard that they have a surveillance program and they're monitoring program. They're monitoring its use. Unless I've heard that incorrectly, that was my interpretation, that WADA is monitoring the use of non-steroidals, but not that there is an intention to change that.
Yes, that was the point I was going to make, Tim. It's under review, and it would be unfortunate if anyone thought there had been a decision. There hasn't been.
Thank you. Dr. Cowling, I want to make it clear, I was aware of the 8 microgram level. I also want to make it clear that while I supported the phenylbutazone concept when it was put on the table, my initial proposal was aspirin. And relative to my extensive comments earlier, I'd be 100% comfortable if aspirin were the non-steroidal we were allowed to use to help those horses that I'm describing as sore or experiencing subclinical inflammation.
Thank you. Cecilia Linnell.
To Dr. Ober. What's your view on reducing intensity of competition by restricting number of starts?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
What's your views on reducing intensity of competition by restricting number of starts? Individual horses.
My gut reaction to that is I don't see how we'll end up with enough horses to field a Nations Cup series, but that's a question of its own and a debate of its own. I don't know that I could give a fair answer on the spot.
So can I answer that? If you want to diminish the number of competitions, it's fine. Absolutely no problem. Then you go from 8 Nations Cup to 4, spread them out in a month and a half, 2 months in between, and make a proper calendar. Cut the shows by all half, but that's the job of the FEI to do it. It's not this place to do it. We can cut competitions, of course. That's absolutely no problem for us. We'll stay more at home with our families and wait. And instead of going to shows every weekend, or 2 shows per week, and just wait for the next show to come, like it was 40 years ago. They did only a show a month.
I will add, this was a tough schedule this year, for sure. If I were having a say in the development of that schedule, I would have tried to avoid it.
Sönke.
I agree that maybe this last question is worth to be discussed, but I would like to come back on the legal aspect just to back what Lisa said. In Germany, the situation is as it was described, and all the reactions we have from contact to government and other authorities are very clear that they will not accept NSAIDs to be allowed in competition, that they have a very close look, that they have all been woken up by the things that happened last year with the proposal of the progressive list. And what this would mean as a consequence, I don't repeat everything that Mr. Scott and Frank Kemperman said before.
Thank you, Sönke. We then have Frank Spadinger, Peter Callings, and Andrew Finding.
Yes, I'd like to come to a question concerning the use you described, Mr. Ober, a person having trained running and go to a car, feel a bit sore, take an aspirin. In my opinion, this person gets an advantage over a person who doesn't take an aspirin because this person can train the next day again. The other person who hasn't taken the aspirin is probably sore the other day and will think about training. One form of doping is to better recover, faster recover, so you can train more. Have you thought about this?
Quick remark from Tim Ober.
Yes, I think I outlined it earlier. To help with inflammation and help with recovery is one thing. To provide analgesia is another entirely. I do not promote analgesic effect during competition. I promote anti-inflammatory effect to help recover from competition. I hope that answers the question.
Peter?
Just want to make a reply to Rodrigo Pessoa. It's very easy to be on this side or that side. I've been on purpose a little bit provocative. I just happened to show a slide with a cartoon of RMM yesterday. I apologize for people who feel offended. Been a little bit provocative today to start the discussion, but I still think what I'm telling you, of course. But I think it's more constructive, as Rodrigo mentioned. If you change the management, the frequency of competitions may solve a lot of these problems. And I think we should work together. I mean, I've been a rider, I've been a treating vet too. Nowadays I'm on this side of the table and I test your horses. But of course, we should go from here trying to do something together, of course. It's no ideal situation to have 50% for and 50% against. Regarding medication, I think I will not change my mind, but we could talk. You had a good example of 3-day event. I remember going back again to the 1990 in the Swedish the Equestrian Games in Stockholm. There was a huge debate about the 3-day event at that time. It was including steeplechase and was quite tough for the horse actually. And different reasons, but I think one reason was that you don't felt that you had to give the horse bute because you could change the concept of 3-day event, and that's what has happened. I mean, you can change concept of 3-day event. You can change the calendar, and I think the riders and the organizer maybe more should be involved. I don't know how it is run today, but to manage the horse in the best way. And I'm quite sure the top riders will do that, even if they have pressure from horse owners and sponsors. But then we're talking about the huge amount of horses at the lower levels or in between somewhere that has to do it for the living. They don't have those big events to earn those big monies, so they have to do it maybe every week. So I think FEI as a regulatory body has to do monitoring on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Finding, please.
Chairman, thank you. Andrew Finding, British Federation. Frank Kemperman and Bruff Scott this morning were very interesting in their presentation about the effectiveness of our sport and the fact that we'll be judged in the court of public opinion. Throughout the last 2 days, the scientists have been talking about the science and the politicians have been talking about the politics. I wonder, Chairman, if we could ask Peter Callings and Tim Ober as the scientists to talk about their views in the way in which we will be judged in terms of our leadership in the court of public opinion.
Tim?
Education, education, and more education.
Peter?
Information, information, information.
Excuse me, please. May I remind you to my question concerning the pain model? I asked the question concerning the pain masking in the performance study.
Do you mean...
Shall I repeat the question?
Yes, my apologies for overlooking that. That is one study. Okay, I sat and listened to Dr. Hinchcliffe discuss proper study design and how studies needed to be focused to answer a specific question. I can only say that of all the research I've heard presented here, that is the only paper which was designed to focus in a focused manner to answer a specific question. Am I willing, as a veterinarian, to hang my hat on that information? I think I would like more. For sure I would like more. But when I look to some of the information that was presented that perhaps maybe applied more, well, let's say, to the racetrack scenario of Dr. Calling's 1999 paper, I'm struggling to find the relevance to this question of non-steroidal use. We looked at 4 sound horses and 1 lame one, gave them a dose of Banamine higher than anything we're talking about, 500 milligrams, intramuscularly, we wouldn't do that, in 4 hours before evaluation. We noticed in the sound horses that gait characteristics changed. Well, we're assuming that that relates to performance. We noticed also in the 1 lame horse that he became lamer after the Banamine administration. So I'm not certain how I can draw conclusions from that study that tells me it's unsafe or dangerous or masking to give a horse flunixin. I can draw a conclusion from Dr. Foreman's paper, but if your question is, am I ready to hang my hat on that alone? No, I would like some more, and I would like some more research along the lines of what Dr. Hinchcliffe proposes. But in the meantime, I've been asked to comment on what's, in my opinion, best for horse welfare. My opinion, it's best not to ask that horse who's sore getting in the car to go jump the next day without offering him some support that is responsible and it is in the interest of horse welfare.
Short remark from Peter.
As I think both Dr. Hinchcliffe and I tried to show during our presentation with different ways how to study effects on performance, and we both started with 5-6 horses on a treadmill. But if you listen to my presentation, I also presented a study on riding horses with lameness 1/2 to 1 degrees, navicular disease, fetlock joint, arthritis, and then we could have effect on those horses. And I think that's maybe more relevant than to have a screw in the frog. Excuse me.
My name is Anna Mörner, come from Denmark, and I'm a veterinarian, and I just wanted to get back to this, the more scientific part of how we assess that these animals really need to have a treatment. Because in veterinary medicine, we're proud about evidence-based medicine and good veterinary practice, but the only, let's say, if I should be a little bit provocative, again, like my colleague Peter Callings, the only evidence I hear for that these animals need this half dose of bute is that they actually feel like we do after we have been running the day before. So I think if we want to get the public to understand that these horses need to sleep better overnight, we need to have some data to prove that these animals are actually sore, that they actually have an inflammation. And again, we're talking about giving them half a dosage, a subtherapeutic off-label dosage of a very, very old molecule, a molecule that is actually banned in countries because of a public health aspect. We're talking about aspirin. I don't know if there's a pharmaceutical company in the world who wants to go into formulating an aspirin for a horse, getting it through the whole registration procedure and also standing up for the possible adverse reactions this old molecule might give. So I think if we want to be, as veterinarians and as horse people, want to impress on the public, we really need to tell them that these animals, we have some way of assessing that these animals actually do suffer from what they have been through, and also show that we, by management, by the good training measurements and so on, really assure that we do the best for these animals. But just to say that probably they feel like we do after we've been running, I don't think that impresses on the public.
I understand that point. I too would like that sort of research, but in the meantime, I don't think it's a great stretch to apply common sense and understand that a horse that jumps at the level of a Grand Prix, or jumps at the level of a cross-country course, is going to experience joint stress, muscle stress, that at times would benefit from some help. There was a second element of that, but my apology.
Could I?
Please. Mike. Oh, sorry.
Wayne Channon from the UK, representing the International Dressage Riders Club. When I came here, the big question I had was, the use of non-steroidals in competition. From what I've heard from especially John Foreman's presentation was that you can't use non-steroidals in competition because it does have an analgesic effect. So the question seems to have moved from the use in competition now, to me, to should we be allowed to use non-steroidals close to a competition, or how close can we use them? Now the question, I've got to go back to riders and say this is the summary of what I found here today, or the last 2 days. From John's presentation, it seems that the protocol that Tim mentioned, the half gram 12 hours before, is acceptable so long as it's done and accurately following that protocol. We're not running any dangers. Is there it also sounds from what I've heard that there is a prophylactic effect of having non-steroidals close to a competition and no downside. Is that an accurate summary? Now we're now debating how we can get, what the threshold level should be, rather than I'm hoping the conversation's closed on whether it should be allowed in competition, because I really don't think it should.
Right, thank you. Oh. Mary Scalay, Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. I feel that a study that's been mentioned by a number of speakers throughout the past 2 days, I'd like to give my perspective on it. It was work that was performed when there was a very liberal medication policy in Kentucky, and I think that the results of the study more reflect a study in human nature than they do specific medication. I think that the veterinarians in the room would all recognize that there are very few medications that are either exclusively benign or exclusively inherently dangerous, and it is for the majority of medications the intent with which they're used that determines whether they're therapeutic or non-therapeutic, which in some ways makes it very difficult to regulate medications. But the Kentucky study, to me, showed that a liberal medication policy facilitates poor decision-making, which had a negative impact on the horse. And I would just urge you going forward to be very mindful and thoughtful. In the States, we're trying very hard to get the genie back in the bottle, and I'd hate to see you let it out without having given it full consideration. That's all.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Yeah, just a reply to, sorry, I forgot your name, but regarding the times, there is a model, current model with the screening limits that will be, could be applied, and you have the detection time. So I think that's the answer on that. I don't want to be rude, but the Foreman study, I think it was a preliminary data. It's not what I know published or scrutinized. So I think we should have to read that a little bit more careful when it's a full paper. Did you get an answer? You know about the FEI, the detection times? Yeah, I think that's the answer.
So,
John.
Sven, again, my name's come up somewhat in vain in the last 20 minutes, so, and I got to bounce about 6 different directions. To follow up on what Mary Scalay described, Dr. Deriklu's office is upstairs from mine at the University of Illinois, and the project that everyone keeps citing from the 95-96 Kentucky Thoroughbred Racing Association data, to put it mildly, that was Kentucky at that time. Drug rules were essentially the wild, wild Midwest. Anything went, non-steroidals of any concentration. If you read that experiment carefully, he excluded 2 horses from the data analysis in that paper that had plasma phenylbutazone concentrations between 110 and 380 micrograms per mil. And so he excluded those as outliers. So they were using huge doses of flunixin and phenylbutazone and in combination. And the one thing the paper does fail to do is it never looks at the 2 as confounding variables when the 2 were combined in a given horse. So to extrapolate that to any other environment other than to say that horses in Kentucky at the time were getting an awful lot of non-steroidals that's probably where I would summarize that paper. And I think Mary's already working very hard to change the industry. As far as the half doses are concerned, this fellow's question about does our model mimic what happens in the real world at those half doses?
I think it does, and something no one's mentioned in the last 2 days with regard to half doses is the number of times, the frequency that we as internists in veterinary hospitals don't use a full dose of Banamine, but a half dose in horses with GI problems, diarrheas and/or colics, and we're using what the Georgia faculty have come to call inappropriately an anti-endotoxic dose of flunixin or Banamine. And so people have frequently used a quarter dose or a half dose of Banamine in those situations. And it's actually one of my pet peeves in the clinic that I watch residents do this all the time. Well, it's not going to be as toxic, so we'll use a half dose. And you know what? By the end of the afternoon, that horse that's trying to develop laminitis is sore-footed. And then they give it another half dose. And then they give it another half dose. And the next thing you know, they're giving more than 2 grams twice a day to that horse because they're accumulating these half doses over and over. So if you give a half dose to one of those horses first thing in the morning in isolation with diarrhea, by noon, it's sore-footed again. And I think we do have clinical, certainly it's anecdotal, but certainly clinically we see that a fair bit. There are other internists in the audience. Marianne might want to comment. I don't know how she feels about it. I have no idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do think that we have reached the time limit now, at least actually also overdone it with 5 minutes. I'd like to conclude this panel discussion by thanking the panel members. I think you've had to work pretty hard, getting a lot of questions, and I would like to thank the auditorium for taking such an active part in it. I would also like to agree with my fellow Vice President, Chris Hudson, that it is really a good thing that we've come together to listen to various opinions and being able to discuss some of the subjects in pretty much detail. Thank you very much, guys. I'll leave the floor now.